The sun was just beginning to set over the city skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the expansive floor of the sterling penthouse. Inside, the air smelled of expensive lemon polish and fresh coffee. For 20-year-old Lily, this was not a home to be enjoyed, but a battlefield to be navigated. She adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform, the fabric scratching against her neck, and picked up her cleaning caddy. She had learned early on that to survive in this house, she had to become invisible. Mrs. Sterling was a woman who valued appearances above all else. Her life was a carefully curated stage, and her staff were merely props. Lily moved through the living room with practiced silence, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floor. She was dusting a shelf of expensive porcelain figurines when the heavy sound of Mrs. Sterling's heels approached. "Lily," the woman's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and demanding. "The glass on the east window. I can see a smudge from here. How many times must I tell you?" Lily froze for a split second, clutching her rag. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. I will get it immediately. See that you do. We have guests coming tonight. I cannot have them thinking I live in a pigsty." With a dismissive wave of her hand, Mrs. Sterling swept out of the room, her silk scarf trailing behind her. Lily let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at the window. It looked perfectly clean to her, but she knew better than to argue. She climbed onto the small step stool and began to wipe the glass again, her arm aching. She was tired. She had been here since 6 in the morning, scrubbing, cooking, and cleaning up after the family's hectic life. But she couldn't complain. She needed this job. Every cent she earned went toward paying for her grandmother's medicine and keeping a roof over their heads. As she worked, the sound of music drifted from the study down the hall. It was the piano. A heavy, expensive grand piano that took up half the room. Mrs. Sterling's daughter, Jessica, was practicing. Jessica had everything Lily could only dream of: expensive clothes, a top-tier education, and a piano that cost more than Lily would earn in 10 years. Lily finished the window and gathered her supplies to move to the study. She hesitated at the door. She wasn't supposed to enter when Jessica was practicing. She knew the rule: she was a distraction, a nuisance. But the music had stopped abruptly, followed by a loud, frustrated bang on the keys. Lily peeked through the open crack of the sliding door. Jessica was sitting at the piano bench, her head in her hands. Sheet music was scattered across the floor. She looked up, her eyes red, and stormed out of the room, brushing past Lily without even seeing her. "I hate this stupid piece," Jessica yelled to no one as she ran up the stairs to her room. Lily stood alone in the hallway. She looked into the empty study. The piano sat there, gleaming under the spotlight. It was a beast of an instrument, dark and majestic. She knew she should just walk away. She should go clean the kitchen or start the laundry. But her feet seemed to move on their own. She stepped into the room. The smell of old wood and varnish filled her nose. It was a smell that pulled at a memory buried deep inside her. Before her life had fallen apart, before the debts and the loss, there had been music. Lily walked slowly toward the piano. She remembered the days when she was a little girl, sitting on the bench next to her mother. Her mother had been a music teacher, strict but kind. They didn't have a grand piano, they had a battered upright keyboard that missed half its notes. But her mother had taught her that music wasn't about the instrument. It was about the feeling. "Music speaks where words fail, little bird," her mother used to say. But that was a lifetime ago. Now, Lily's hands were rough. Her fingers were dry from constant exposure to harsh cleaning chemicals. She looked down at her palms. They were the hands of a worker, not an artist. She felt a sharp pang of sadness in her chest. She had lost her scholarship to the conservatory when her mother got sick. There was no money for lessons, no money for the application fees. The dream had died quietly, replaced by the reality of scrubbing floors and serving rich people who didn't even know her name. She reached the bench. She didn't sit down at first. She just stood there, looking at the sheet music scattered on the floor. It was a Chopin etude. She recognized the notes immediately. It was a difficult piece, full of fast runs and heavy emotion. It was the piece Jessica had been struggling with all week. Lily crouched down and picked up the papers. She stacked them neatly on the music rack. She looked around the room. The house was quiet. Mrs. Sterling was in her room getting ready. Jessica was upstairs. The other staff were downstairs. Just once, Lily whispered to herself. Just to see if I still remember. She sat down on the leather bench. It was soft and cool. She placed her hands on the keys. They felt foreign and cold. She flexed her fingers. They felt stiff. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She didn't care about the chemicals or the soreness. She needed to hear the sound. She pressed down on a single key. A clear, perfect C major note rang out in the silent room. It was beautiful. It was a sound that vibrated right through her chest. She pressed another. Then a chord. She wasn't playing the piece yet, she was just remembering the touch, the weight of the keys. Slowly, her left hand found the bass line. It was a simple, melancholy rhythm. Her right hand began to play the melody. It started shaky, like a rusty engine starting up. But as the music grew, her muscles remembered. Her fingers moved faster, finding the notes without her eyes needing to check. She began to play the part Jessica had messed up, the fast, intricate run that went up the scale and back down. Her fingers danced over the ivory keys. It wasn't perfect, her timing was a little off, and her pinky finger was weak, but the emotion was there. She poured her loneliness into the music. She played the tiredness in her bones, the sadness of her lost dreams, and the quiet desperation of her life. The room seemed to disappear. The grand penthouse, the looming debts, the harsh words of Mrs. Sterling, they all faded away. There was only the vibration of the strings and the melody in the air. Unbeknownst to Lily, she was not alone. Standing by the frosted glass partition that separated the study from the hallway was a tall man in a sharp gray suit. Julian Thorne, the CEO of the company that managed the building, had arrived early to discuss some security upgrades with Mrs. Sterling. He had been walking toward the living room when the sound stopped him. He knew music. He sponsored symphonies and attended galas. He heard professionals play every week. But there was something different about what he was hearing now. It wasn't technically flawless, but it was raw. It was honest. Julian stood still, watching the young woman in the maid's uniform. He saw her posture, slightly hunched as if she was trying to make herself small, even while sitting. He saw the way she held her wrists, not with the rigid discipline of a trained student, but with the fluid grace of a natural storyteller. He noticed her hands. From where he stood, he could see the red, irritated skin on her knuckles, the sign of hard labor. Yet, those hands were coaxing a melody out of a $250,000 instrument that made him stop and close his own eyes. Lily didn't notice him. She was lost in the memory of her mother's voice, imagining she was back in their small apartment, playing for the only person who ever believed in her. She played the final chord of the phrase, letting it ring out into the silence. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands hovering over the keys. The echo of the note faded away. Then, the reality of the room rushed back in. She looked at the clock on the wall. Panic flared in her chest. She had been sitting there for 5 minutes. She was going to get caught. She pulled her hands back as if the keys had burned her. She stood up quickly, smoothing down her apron. She looked around nervously, her heart pounding. She didn't see anyone. She let out a shaky breath. She told herself she was being foolish. Nobody cared about the maid. As long as the work was done, she was invisible. She turned to leave the room, her eyes cast down toward the floor. But as she walked toward the sliding door, she had a strange feeling, a prickle on the back of her neck. She paused, looking up just for a second. Julian stepped back quietly into the shadows of the hallway, not wanting to intrude on her private moment, or perhaps, not wanting to break the spell of the music just yet. He watched her walk away, her head bowed low, returning to her scrubbing and cleaning. He filed the image away in his mind. He had come to talk about security protocols, but he realized he had found something much more interesting in the study. He waited until she was gone before stepping out, the ghost of the melody still lingering in his ears. The night of the Sterling Gala was the kind of event that made Lily wish she could become completely invisible. The penthouse was transformed. Soft golden light bathed the rooms, and expensive jazz music played from hidden speakers. The air smelled of rich perfumes, expensive cigars, and gourmet appetizers. Lily stood in the kitchen, balancing a heavy silver tray filled with champagne flutes. The bubbles in the glasses sparkled under the lights, looking like liquid gold, but for Lily, they were just another heavy thing to carry without spilling. Mrs. Sterling had been in a panic all day, making sure every surface was dusted and every pillow was fluffed to perfection. Now, the guests were arriving. These were the city's elite business owners, politicians, and celebrities. They drifted into the living room, dressed in silk and designer suits, holding their drinks and laughing loudly. Lily moved through them like a ghost, offering drinks and removing empty plates, trying her best not to make eye contact. She knew that if she looked at them too long, they might notice she was actually a person, and that would only lead to trouble. "Champagne, sir?" Lily asked softly, approaching a tall man in a dark suit. He didn't even look at her. He just took a glass and turned his back to continue his conversation. Lily didn't mind. That was how she preferred it. The less attention she got, the safer she was. She made her way toward the edge of the room where a small crowd was gathering around the piano. Mrs. Sterling had hired a famous pianist for the evening. His name was Mr. Galloway. He was a man with a large ego and a reputation for being difficult to please. He sat at the grand piano, wearing a tuxedo that looked like it cost more than Lily's car. He was running his fingers over the keys, playing a few flashy scales to warm up, turning his head to acknowledge the applause. "Play the Chopin, darling," one of the guests shouted. Mr. Galloway smiled, a smug, tight-lipped smile. "As you wish," he said. He launched into the piece. It was the same etude that Lily had touched earlier that day. It started out well. The notes were crisp and clear. Mr. Galloway had excellent technique. His fingers moved fast, hitting the keys with precision. But as the music went on, the tempo got faster. This was the hard part of the song. The music was supposed to flow like water, but Mr. Galloway was playing it like he was trying to conquer it. He was hitting the keys too hard, rushing the rhythm. Then, it happened. In the middle of a complicated run, his left hand stumbled. He hit a discordant note, a jarring, ugly sound that clashed with the melody. He tried to recover, but the rhythm was broken. He hit another wrong note immediately after. He finished the phrase with a heavy thud, missing the soft ending the song required. There was a polite silence, followed by hesitant clapping. Most people probably didn't notice the mistake, but the mood felt a bit awkward. Mr. Galloway stood up and bowed deeply, acting as if he had just played the masterpiece of the century. He looked very pleased with himself. Lily stood near the back of the crowd. She knew the piece well. She had listened to it countless times on old recordings, and she had played it herself earlier that day. When he hit the wrong notes, she winced. It was an involuntary reaction. She felt the mistake in her chest like a physical pain. She pursed her lips slightly and shifted her weight, looking down at her tray to hide her expression. Unfortunately for her, Jessica, Mrs. Sterling's daughter, was standing nearby. Jessica had had a few glasses of champagne and was looking for something to amuse herself. She saw Lily's face. She saw the little wince. "Did you see that?" Jessica said, her voice loud enough for the people around her to hear. The maid just rolled her eyes. The conversation in the small circle stopped. Mrs. Sterling turned around, her face flushing red with embarrassment. She marched over to Lily, the feathers on her dress trembling. "Is that true?" Mrs. Sterling hissed. "Did you just criticize our guest?" Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. "No, ma'am. I had something in my eye. I wasn't looking at anything." "Liar," Jessica giggled. "She thinks she knows better than a professional pianist. It's hilarious." Mr. Galloway, hearing his name, walked over. He adjusted his cuffs and looked down his nose at Lily. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice cold. "Apparently, the help thinks your performance was lacking," Jessica said, poking Lily in the shoulder. "Go on then. If you're such an expert, why don't you tell him what he did wrong?" A few of the guests laughed. It was a cruel laugh, the kind of laugh people make when they feel superior to someone else. Lily felt the heat rise up her neck. She felt small and dirty in her uniform, standing amidst all these rich, powerful people. She looked at Mrs. Sterling, pleading silently for her to stop this. "Don't look at me," Mrs. Sterling snapped. "You have always had a strange attitude, Lily. Always acting like you are better than this job. Acting like you are too good to scrub floors." "I never said that, ma'am," Lily whispered. "You didn't have to say it," Mrs. Sterling said, turning to the guests. "These people, they come into our homes, and they think they can judge us. They think because they watch a few videos on the internet, they understand art. It's pathetic." Mr. Galloway sneered. He looked at Lily's rough, red hands. "These are hands for cleaning toilets, young lady. Do not presume to understand the complexity of what I just played. It takes decades of discipline." "It's true," one of the other guests chimed in, a man holding a cigar. "Stick to the champagne, darling." The laughter grew louder. Lily felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She gripped the silver tray so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run. She wanted to drop the tray and run out of the penthouse and never come back. But she needed the money. She couldn't run. "She's trembling," Jessica pointed out, delighting in the cruelty. "Look at her. She's scared." "I'm not scared," Lily said quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady. "Excuse me." Mrs. Sterling stepped closer. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not scared," Lily repeated, a little louder. She looked up, her eyes meeting Mrs. Sterling's. "I just know the song. That is all." The crowd went quiet for a second, surprised that the shy maid had spoken up. Then Mr. Galloway let out a loud, mocking laugh. "You know the song," he laughed. "Wonderful. This is rich. A maid knows Chopin." Jessica clapped her hands together. "Oh, this is perfect. Come on, then. Let's see it." "Jessica, stop," Mrs. Sterling said, though she didn't look angry at her daughter. She looked annoyed at Lily for causing a scene. "No, really," Jessica pushed. "If she's going to stand there and judge a master, let her play. Go on, Lily. Sit down. Show Mr. Galloway how it's done." It was a trap. Lily knew it was a trap. They wanted her to sit down, fail, and look foolish so they could have a good laugh. They wanted to put her in her place. If she refused, she would be rude and lose her job. If she played and messed up, she would be humiliated. "She won't do it," Mr. Galloway said, waving his hand dismissively. "She knows she can't. She probably can't even read music. Can you, girl?" Lily looked at the piano. It sat there in the center of the room, shining under the lights. It looked terrifying. But she also remembered how it felt to play it that afternoon. She remembered the feeling of her mother's hands guiding hers. "I can play," Lily said. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Sterling's eyes nearly popped out of her head. She grabbed Lily's arm. "You will do no such thing. You will make a fool of me and this entire household. Put the tray down and go to the kitchen." Lily gently pulled her arm away. "You said I was judging him, ma'am. You said I think I am better. I am just trying to show you that I respect the music. That is all." She walked toward the piano. Her legs felt like lead. The guests parted to make a path for her, some of them smirking, others looking at her with pure curiosity. She placed her tray on a side table with a clatter. "Is this a joke?" someone whispered. Lily reached the bench. She could feel the eyes of 20 wealthy strangers burning into her back. She could feel Jessica's smirk and Mrs. Sterling's rage. She looked over at Mr. Galloway, who was leaning against the piano with his arms crossed, a look of amusement on his face. "Don't break a nail," he whispered. Lily sat down on the bench. It felt colder than before. The piano seemed like a monster waiting to swallow her whole. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. She closed her eyes for a second and blocked out the room. She blocked out the expensive dresses and the champagne. She thought only about the music. She placed her fingers on the keys. The silence in the room was heavy, waiting for her to fail. She didn't know if she could do it. Her hands were sweating. But she knew she had to try. She had to try, not just for herself, but to show them that music didn't belong to them. It belonged to anyone who had a heart. The silence that filled the room was heavy and suffocating, pressing down on Lily's shoulders like a physical weight. She sat on the polished leather bench, her back rigid, feeling the stares of 20 strangers piercing through her. To them, this was just a moment of entertainment before they returned to their drinks and gossip. To Lily, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Mrs. Sterling looked furious. Her face had turned a shade of pale white that clashed with her red lipstick. She took a step forward, her hand raised as if to physically pull Lily off the bench. "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Sterling snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "She is a cleaning lady, Julian. She has no business touching that instrument. I forbid it." Lily didn't move. She couldn't. She kept her eyes fixed on the black and white keys, terrified that if she looked up, she would see the mocking smiles of the guests and lose her nerve completely. "Leave her be." The voice came from the back of the room, deep and calm. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made everyone stop talking. The crowd parted slightly, and Julian Thorne stepped forward. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, and he didn't look amused. He looked serious. He walked past Mrs. Sterling, ignoring her glare, and stopped a few feet away from the piano. "If the girl says she can play, let her play," Julian said. He looked down at Lily. "Music is a language, Mrs. Sterling. It is not a privilege of class. If your maid speaks it better than your guest, that is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to listen to." Mr. Galloway let out a sharp, dismissive laugh from the side. He uncrossed his arms and waved his hand in the air. "Come now, Julian. Don't be ridiculous. Look at her hands. They are ruined from scrubbing tiles. She has no finesse. She has no training. This is a waste of our time." "Then a few minutes of wasted time won't hurt anyone," Julian replied smoothly. He turned his gaze back to Lily. "Go ahead." Lily took a shaky breath. She felt a strange mix of fear and gratitude. Julian was the only person in the room who wasn't laughing. He stood there like a rock, giving her the space she needed. She placed her right hand on the keys. Her fingers were still trembling. The guests were whispering again. "She's going to embarrass herself," Jessica whispered loudly to a friend nearby. "I can't wait." Lily blocked them out. She thought about her mother. She remembered the small, dusty keyboard in their old living room. She remembered the feeling of the music flowing through her when she was a child, before the world told her she wasn't good enough. She closed her eyes for a brief second and let the memories wash over her. She wasn't a maid right now. She wasn't a servant. She was just a person who loved the sound of a melody. She started to play. At first, the sound was tentative. It was soft and unsure, testing the response of the keys. She played the opening notes of the Chopin piece. They were simple, clear, and precise. A few people in the room stopped whispering to listen. It wasn't bad. In fact, it was perfectly in tune. Then, Lily began to play the melody properly. She let go of the fear. Her fingers, which had been stiff and cold a moment ago, suddenly warmed up. They moved with a memory of their own. They found the patterns, the scales, and the hidden rhythms that lived in the music. She wasn't just hitting the notes. She was shaping them. She played the opening phrase not as a series of sounds, but as a question hanging in the air. The tone was melancholy and sweet. It was a sound that didn't belong in a flashy penthouse party. It sounded like it belonged in a quiet church or an old concert hall. The room began to quiet down rapidly. The whispers died away. It wasn't because someone told them to be quiet, but because the sound demanded their attention. There was a quality to the playing that was undeniable. It had a singing quality that Mr. Galloway's performance had completely lacked. Lily's hands moved faster now. She reached the difficult section, the part where the famous pianist had messed up. Her heart was beating fast, but her fingers remained steady. She didn't rush. She stayed in control, letting the music breathe. The fast runs flowed like water, smooth and connected. She hit every single note with clarity. Mr. Galloway's smirk slowly faded. He stood up straighter, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the keyboard. He was a professional, and he knew enough to realize that the technique he was hearing was far above amateur level. This wasn't someone who had watched a few videos. This was someone who had practiced for hours, someone who knew the language of the piano intimately. Jessica held her champagne glass tight, her eyes wide. She looked at her mother, confused. Mrs. Sterling's mouth was open slightly, her anger replaced by a look of pure shock. She looked from the piano to Julian, as if asking him to explain what was happening. Julian stood still, his eyes closed, just listening. He had a small smile on his face, a look of genuine appreciation. He could hear the emotion behind the notes. It wasn't just a technical display, it was full of feeling. He could hear the sadness in the lower notes and the hope in the high notes. It was the sound of a story being told without words. Lily forgot where she was. She forgot about the tray, the cleaning, and the debt. She forgot about the cruel comments and the humiliation. She was inside the music now. It was a safe place where she was free. She played with a passion she hadn't let out in years. She poured her longing, her loneliness, and her dreams into the keys. The piano sang back to her, vibrating against her fingertips, connecting her to something bigger than herself. As she approached the climax of the piece, the music grew louder and more intense. Her left hand hammered out the deep bass chords while her right hand danced frantically above. The sound filled the massive room, bouncing off the high ceilings. It was powerful and overwhelming. The guests were completely captivated. A man who had been checking his watch put it back in his pocket, unable to look away. Two women stopped their conversation completely, their faces softened by the melody. Even the security guards standing near the entrance were leaning in to listen. Lily's fingers flew across the keys, sweat forming on her brow. She was pushing herself, playing with more force than she ever had in the privacy of her mind. She reached the final chaotic run, a blur of notes that cascaded down the scale. She didn't miss a single one. She transitioned perfectly into the final chords. She struck the last notes with a firm, decisive hand. Dum, dum, dum. The final chord rang out, resonating through the quiet penthouse. It was a deep, rich sound that seemed to hang in the air for an eternity. Lily held her hands on the keys, letting the vibration fade until there was nothing left but silence. She slowly opened her eyes. The golden room came back into focus. She felt the cold air on her face again. She realized her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline of the performance. She quickly pulled her hands back and placed them in her lap, lowering her head. She waited for the shouting. She waited for Mrs. Sterling to scream at her to get out. She waited for them to tell her she was fired. But there was no shouting. There was no laughter. There was only a stunned, heavy silence that felt louder than any noise she had ever heard. Lily sat on the bench, staring at her lap, terrified to move. She had done what they asked, but she knew she had crossed a line. She had shown them a part of herself she wasn't supposed to have. And now, she had to face the consequences. Her heart beat wildly in her chest as she waited for the verdict of the room. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, wrapping around the room like a blanket. It wasn't the polite silence that usually follows a performance at a party, the kind where people are just waiting for their turn to speak. This was different. It was the silence of people who had been completely taken by surprise. The air in the penthouse felt charged, as if a storm had just passed through and left everything changed. Lily sat frozen on the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she didn't dare wipe it away. She kept her head down, staring at her worn-out black shoes. She was terrified to look up. She knew that at any second, the spell would break. Mrs. Sterling would shout, or someone would laugh, and the moment would be over. She braced herself for the yelling, for the insults, for the order to pack her things and leave. But then, a sound cut through the quiet. It was the sound of a glass being placed firmly, but gently, onto a table. Clink. Everyone turned to look. It was Julian Thorne. He was standing near the window, his back straight, a look of deep thought on his face. He slowly began to clap. It wasn't a fast, excited clap. It was a slow, rhythmic beat of appreciation. 1, 2, 3. For a second, nobody moved. Then, the man standing near the buffet table joined in. Then a woman in a blue dress. Within moments, the entire room was applauding. It wasn't just polite clapping anymore. It grew louder and fuller, until the room was filled with genuine applause. Lily flinched at the sound. She didn't understand. She had expected anger, not this. That was acceptable, a voice said from the side. It was Mr. Galloway. The famous pianist was standing with his arms crossed, looking at the piano with a strange expression. He tried to look calm, but his face was flushed. He was clearly struggling to accept what had just happened. Acceptable. Julian Thorne's voice cut through the clapping. He walked into the center of the room, looking directly at the famous musician. It was far more than that, and you know it. You played the notes, Mr. Galloway. She played the music. There is a difference. Mr. Galloway stiffened. I am a professional. I have played in concert halls around the world. I played the piece as it was written. She played it with too much emotion. It was messy. It was human, Julian corrected him. And it was technically flawless on the difficult runs where you stumbled. But we don't need to argue. Everyone here has ears. They know what they heard. Mr. Galloway fell silent. He looked at Lily, then looked away, unable to meet her eyes. He knew he had been outplayed, not by skill, but by heart. Mrs. Sterling finally found her voice. She marched over to the piano, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She didn't look happy about the applause. She looked humiliated that her maid had upstaged her expensive guest. That is enough, she said loudly, killing the mood. Lily, get up from there. You have made a scene. Lily quickly stood up. She felt dizzy. She kept her eyes on the floor. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to. Mrs. Sterling laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. You deliberately embarrassed us in front of Mr. Thorne. You sat there and acted like you belong in this room. But look at you. You are still wearing your uniform. You are still the help. She grabbed Lily's arm roughly. Go to the kitchen. Now. You are finished serving for tonight. I will deal with you later. Lily didn't fight back. She let Mrs. Sterling pull her away from the piano. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. The applause had made her feel important for a second, but Mrs. Sterling's words brought her back to reality. She wasn't a musician. She was just a maid who had touched something she wasn't supposed to touch. She walked toward the kitchen door, her head held low. She wanted to disappear. She just wanted to go home and cry. Lily. She stopped. It was Julian's voice again. She turned around slowly. Julian was standing between her and Mrs. Sterling. He held up a hand to stop Mrs. Sterling from dragging her away. "Let her go," Julian said quietly. "Mr. Thorne, this is my employee," Mrs. Sterling sputtered. "She has broken the rules. She was rude to my guest." "She wasn't rude," Julian said firmly. "She was challenged, and she accepted. And she proved every person in this room wrong. If anyone was rude tonight, it was you and your daughter, and your guest, for treating her with such disrespect." The room gasped. Nobody spoke to Mrs. Sterling like that. She was the queen of this social circle. But Julian didn't care. He looked at Mrs. Sterling with a coldness that made her step back. "Mrs. Sterling," Julian continued, "you have a rare talent living in your home. A diamond covered in dirt. And you treat her like she is nothing. That says more about you than it does about her." He turned to Lily. His expression softened. He looked at her not as a rich man looking at a maid, but as one human being looking at another. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. Lily trembled. "Since I was little, sir. But I stopped, 10 years ago. When my mother got sick." "Why did you stop?" "I had to work," Lily said simply. "We needed money. The piano it was a dream that didn't pay the bills." Julian nodded slowly. He looked at her red, rough hands again. "And do you still play when you can?" Lily shook her head. "No, sir. I don't have a piano. I remember the notes. I play in my head sometimes. That was the first time I've touched a real piano in 10 years. The guests whispered in shock. She hadn't played in 10 years and she could play like that on her first try. It seemed impossible. Julian looked impressed. "Natural talent," he said to the room. "You can't teach that. You can buy lessons, you can buy a piano, but you cannot buy the soul she put into that performance." He turned back to Mrs. Sterling. "I have a proposition." Mrs. Sterling looked wary. "What kind of proposition?" "Lily is wasted here," Julian said. "You don't appreciate her." "I do. I would like to hire her." "Hire her?" Mrs. Sterling laughed. "To do what? Scrub your floors?" "No," Julian said. "I sponsor a scholarship program for the arts at the city university. I have connections. I can get her an audition. And in the meantime, I can use an assistant at my office who actually knows how to listen and pay attention. Someone with discipline." Lily's mouth fell open. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. An audition, a job in an office, it sounded like a different world. "She has a contract with me," Mrs. Sterling said sharply, realizing she might lose her maid. "And I need her here." "I will buy out her contract," Julian said. "I will pay you whatever she makes in a year, right now, just to let her go." He pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. He didn't even blink. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and tore it out. He handed it to Mrs. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling looked at the check. Her eyes went wide. It was more than Lily's salary for a year. It was enough to cover the cost of the dress Jessica was wearing and the catering for the night. "Is this acceptable?" Julian asked. Mrs. Sterling swallowed hard. She looked at the check, then at Lily. She realized she could make a profit and get rid of the maid who had embarrassed her at the same time. It was a win-win. "Well, Mrs. Sterling sniffed, folding the check and putting it in her purse. If you insist, Julian. I suppose I can find someone else. She was getting sloppy with the cleaning anyway. Lily felt a sting at the words, but she didn't care anymore. She looked at Julian. Do I have a choice? Lily asked, her voice small. Julian smiled. Yes, Lily. You always have a choice. Do you want to stay here and clean windows for people who think you are nothing, or do you want to come with me and see what you can really do? Lily looked around the room. She saw Mr. Galloway looking away, jealous. She saw Jessica checking her phone, bored now that the excitement was over. She saw Mrs. Sterling clutching her new check. Then she looked at the piano. She thought about the music. She thought about the way it felt to be free, if only for a few minutes. She thought about her mother, who always told her to never let go of her dream, no matter how hard life got. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. These weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief. I want to go, Lily whispered. Please. Julian nodded. He held out his arm, not to grab her, but to guide her. Then let's go. Lily took a breath. She straightened her back. For the first time all night, she didn't look at the floor. She looked the guests in the eye. She walked past Mrs. Sterling, past the piano, and stood next to Julian Thorne. She didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt like she was finally being seen. Good evening, everyone, Julian said to the stunned room. I think the party is over for us. He walked toward the elevator, and Lily walked beside him, leaving the grand penthouse, the judgment, and the silver tray behind. As the elevator doors chimed open, she stepped inside, ready for a new song to begin. The ride down in the elevator felt like the longest journey of Lily's life, but also the shortest. The sleek metal box descended smoothly, carrying her away from the golden lights of the Sterling penthouse and down toward the street level. Julian stood beside her, quiet and composed, checking messages on his phone. He didn't feel the need to fill the silence with empty words, and for that, Lily was grateful. Her heart was still racing, thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors of the elevator. She looked the same, wearing the black uniform, the apron tied a little too tight, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. But inside, she felt completely different. She felt like a heavy chain had been broken. When the doors slid open, the cool night air of the city greeted them. A sleek black car was waiting at the curb, the driver holding the door open. Julian gestured for her to get in. Lily hesitated for a split second. It felt wrong to sit in such a nice car in her uniform, like she was soiling the leather seats. But then she remembered Mrs. Sterling's sneer, and she climbed in. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic, Lily watched the tall apartment building disappear into the distance. She thought about the piano she had left behind. She wondered if Mrs. Sterling was already yelling at the other staff, or if she was bragging to her friends about the check she had just received. You are very quiet, Julian said, putting his phone away. I'm sorry, Lily said quickly, sitting up straighter. I'm just waiting to wake up. It feels like a dream. It is not a dream, Julian said. He looked at her with a kind smile. It is a new chapter. But I want you to understand something, Lily. Tonight was the spark, but the fire is up to you. A scholarship is an opportunity, not a magic wand. It will be hard work. Harder than scrubbing floors, in a different way. I'm not afraid of hard work, Lily said softly. I've been working since I was 14. I know what tired feels like. Julian nodded. I can see that. But this work will feed your soul, not just your stomach. The car drove through the city streets, passing bright shops and busy restaurants. They eventually pulled up in front of a modern, glass building that Lily recognized. It was the city's premier conservatory of music. She had walked past it many times on her way to the bus stop, staring up at the grand entrance with longing, never daring to step inside. Why are we here? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Because tomorrow is too late, Julian said. He stepped out of the car and offered her his hand. I happen to know the dean is working late tonight, and after I called him about a secret talent I discovered, he asked us to come by. Lily felt her knees go weak. Tonight now, but I look. She gestured at her maid's uniform. Julian looked her up and down. You look like a woman who conquered a room full of sharks. Come on. They walked into the building. The security guards nodded respectfully at Julian and opened the gates without question. The inside of the conservatory was beautiful. The walls were lined with photos of famous musicians. The air smelled of wood polish and old sheet music. It was quiet, the kind of respectful quiet that Lily had only felt in libraries. They took an elevator up to the top floor. Julian knocked on a heavy oak door. A moment later, an older man with white hair and glasses opened it. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. Julian, the man said, shaking his hand. And this must be the young lady you told me about. Please, come in. They walked into a large office filled with books. There was a small upright piano in the corner. The dean, whose name was Dr. Arrogance, looked at Lily. He didn't ask about her uniform. He didn't ask about her background. He just sat on the edge of his desk and looked at her expectantly. Julian says you haven't played in 10 years, Dr. Arrogance said. No, sir, Lily said. Not on a real piano. And yet, you played one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire perfectly tonight. I think the music was just in my head, Lily admitted. I didn't want to forget it. Dr. Arrogance smiled. That is usually how the best musicians start. They can't forget the music even if they try. He stood up and walked over to the small piano. I don't need a speech. I don't need to hear about your hardships. Julian trusts you, and that is enough for me to give you a chance. But I need to hear you play. Just you and me. No audience. No pressure. Lily looked at Julian. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. She walked over to the piano. It wasn't a grand piano like the Sterlings had. It was an upright, a little scratched, with a soundboard that had seen better days. But to Lily, it looked like the most beautiful instrument in the world. She sat down on the bench. It felt worn and comfortable, shaped by the thousands of students who had sat there before her. She didn't play the Chopin piece this time. She didn't want to prove anything flashy. Instead, she closed her eyes and let her hands find the keys of a simple lullaby. It was the first song her mother had taught her. The melody was slow and gentle. She played it with a tenderness that made the room feel warm. She poured all her love for her mother into the notes. She played the relief she felt at leaving the penthouse. She played the hope she was feeling for the first time in years. The small piano filled the office with a sweet, melancholy sound. When she finished, she opened her eyes. Dr. Arrogance was wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. Julian was standing by the window, looking out at the city, but he turned when the music stopped. Your technique needs work, of course, Dr. Aris said, his voice slightly raspy. Your fingers are stiff from lack of practice. But your touch is pure gold. We can teach you the technique. We cannot teach you how to feel like that. He walked over to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. I am granting you a full scholarship, starting immediately. This covers your tuition, your books, and even a small stipend for living expenses so you do not have to work while you study. We have practice rooms that are open until midnight. You are welcome here anytime. Lily stared at the paper. It didn't seem real. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. There is one condition, Dr. Aris said sternly. You must practice. Every day. You have a gift that was buried for 10 years. We cannot waste another minute of it. I promise, Lily said, and she meant it. They left the building a short while later. Julian drove her to the small apartment building where she lived with her grandmother. It was in a rough part of town, far from the shiny penthouse. The street lights were flickering, and there was garbage on the sidewalk. Lily stood outside the car, nervous to let Julian see where she lived. This is me, she said quietly. Julian looked at the building, then back at her. Home is where the heart is, Lily. And tonight, you showed us your heart is in the right place. One more thing, he said before she could close the door. My offer for a job is still open. I need someone organized to help manage my schedule and correspondence. It is a daytime job, flexible hours. It will pay enough to take care of your grandmother and the bills. You don't have to scrub floors anymore. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long worrying about money, about rent, about medicine. The weight was suddenly gone. I would like that, she said. Thank you. Get some sleep, Julian said. I will have my driver pick you up at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't be late. As the black car drove away, Lily turned and walked up the cracked concrete steps to her building. She unlocked the front door, which stuck as always, and climbed the 3 flights of stairs. When she walked into her small apartment, the smell of old soup and medicine greeted her. It was a familiar, safe smell. Her grandmother was asleep in her armchair, the TV flickering in the corner. Lily stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the woman she had fought so hard to protect. She thought about the uniform she was wearing. She thought about the grand piano and the small upright piano. She walked over to the small kitchen table where a framed photo of her mother sat. She touched the glass of the frame gently. I did it, Mom, she whispered into the dark room. They heard me. She didn't cry. She didn't feel like crying anymore. She felt a quiet strength settle in her chest. She took off her apron and folded it neatly. She wouldn't need it tomorrow. Tomorrow, she would wear her own clothes. Tomorrow, she would sit in an office and later, she would go to the conservatory to practice on a real piano. Lily walked over to her grandmother and gently covered her with a blanket. The old woman stirred but didn't wake up. Lily smiled, turned off the TV, and walked to the window. Outside, the city was loud and bright, full of challenges and opportunities. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a musician. And her life was finally beginning to play the right notes.